I still don't know if it was the hotel or him, but something about that place made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there, or maybe that I was supposed to be somewhere else entirely. I mean, I was staying in this downtown boutique hotel for a work trip, nothing fancy, just a couple of nights away from my tiny apartment and the constant background noise of my life. But from the moment I checked in, something felt off. Not bad, just unusual. The first time I noticed him was on my second evening there. I was heading back to my room after grabbing a late coffee downstairs when I saw him by the elevator. Tall, a bit lanky, with this kind of easy, slightly crooked smile that made you think he was hiding a joke just out of sight. He was wearing the concierge uniform, sharp blazer, name tag, polished shoes, definitely the face of the hotel. But what threw me was the way he looked at me, like he recognized me even though we'd never met. Not in a creepy stare-at-you kind of way, but more like an old friend who's just caught your eye across a crowded room. "Rough day?" he asked when I stepped into the elevator. I shrugged, not really expecting to chat with the concierge. Usually these guys just give you directions or nod politely, but he had this casual vibe, like he wasn't just doing a job, he was actually interested. "Just the usual grind," I said. He smiled again, that half smile that made me want to say more, but I didn't know what. "Room service or a night out?" "I'm more of a night-in kind of guy," I said. He nodded like he understood. Fair enough. Then he stepped out on the floor below mine and the elevator doors shut. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just being friendly. But over the next couple of days, he kept showing up on my floor, not in a pushy, hovering way, more like he was always just nearby. Sometimes I'd catch him arranging fresh towels outside rooms. Other times, he'd appear in the hallway, a casual smile, offering to help if I needed anything. One night, I even found him sitting in the lounge area right outside my door, reading a book. When our eyes met, he didn't look surprised. It was like he'd been expecting me. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just lonely and overthinking every encounter. But after a while, it felt like he was intentionally there, on my floor, waiting for something. I'm not usually the type to get caught up in hotel romance cliches. I'm more about routines, schedules, and keeping things simple. But with him, it was different. There was this quiet energy every time our paths crossed, something unspoken but electric. And then, on my last night before checking out, something happened that made me realize this wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just a friendly concierge doing his job. It was something else entirely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how a random stay in a hotel turned into one of the most confusing and unexpectedly sweet encounters I've ever had. Because, honestly, I never thought a guy in a concierge suit could upend my entire idea of what a work trip should be. So the night before I was supposed to check out, I found myself lingering in the hallway outside my room longer than usual. Not because I had anything to do, but because I kept hoping he'd show up again. Call it dumb curiosity, or maybe just that feeling when you sense something about to happen but you don't know what it is yet. He showed up, of course. Like clockwork, there he was, leaning against the wall, hands shoved in the pockets of his blazer, looking way more relaxed than a concierge at 10 p.m. probably should be. "Hey," he said, that same easy smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I swallowed, trying to seem casual. "Hey." He glanced around like he was making sure no one was listening, then nodded toward the lounge down the hall. "Want to grab a drink? I've got some espresso left from the lobby. Doesn't taste great, but it's something." I hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure, why not?" We moved to the lounge, where the lighting was dim, and the furniture was this weird mix of modern and vintage that somehow worked. I grabbed 2 paper cups from the coffee machine, handed one to him, and we sat facing each other on opposite couches. "So you work here?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about him besides the fact that he was the concierge. "Yeah, more or less. I'm technically the lobby manager, but I do concierge stuff too. Keeps me busy." He sipped his coffee and winced. This stuff could cure a hangover, but it's not winning any awards for taste. I laughed. "I'm Ian, by the way. Eli." He stuck out his hand and I shook it, noticing how warm his palm was. "So Eli, what's your story?" Don't think I've met a concierge who casually hangs out on the 15th floor reading books before. He smiled, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Maybe nervousness, maybe something else. Honestly, I like this floor. It's quieter, fewer people, and it's got the best view of the city at night. I glanced out the window and saw the city lights twinkling, the streets packed with cars, and life far below. Yeah, that's not bad. I'm usually all about the window view, too. Yeah? He leaned forward a little. Makes you think about what's going on down there. People rushing around, stories happening, but up here it's like the world slows down. I nodded, suddenly feeling like this conversation was a lot less random than it seemed. You ever think about just leaving it all? Moving somewhere quieter yourself? He shrugged. Sometimes. But then I remember I'm not really built for quiet. I laughed. Fair enough. We sat there in this easy silence for a minute, just sipping bad coffee and watching the city breathe. The way he looked at me, like he wanted to say something more but wasn't sure how, made my chest tighten a little. It was clear he wasn't just being friendly anymore. Then he surprised me. I noticed you keep to yourself. Don't really seem like the usual hotel guest, you know? I shrugged, trying to play it cool. I'm not. Just here for work. Nothing glamorous. He smiled gently, like he saw through the walls I was putting up. Sometimes those are the best kind of people, the ones who don't need to show off. That hit me more than I expected. I looked down at my cup, suddenly self-conscious. I guess I just didn't expect to find someone like you here. Like me? He raised an eyebrow. Yeah, someone who's different, who actually seems to care. He leaned back and looked out the window again, silent for a moment. Then he turned back to me with this quiet intensity. I'm glad you noticed. That felt like everything and nothing at the same time. I wasn't sure what to say next, so I just smiled. Hey, I know this is random, Eli said suddenly, but I'll be here for a while longer. If you want, tomorrow, after you check out, we could grab a real coffee. Not this stuff. I blinked, my heart doing this weird fluttery thing that felt like it might explode or disappear completely. Yeah, I'd like that. And just like that, the night shifted. Something unspoken had passed between us, like the beginning of a story neither of us knew how to tell yet. I went to bed that night with a million thoughts spinning in my head. What was it about him that felt so familiar and yet totally new? Why did I care so much about a guy whose job was to hand me keys and directions? And most importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do when I got home, and none of this was just a hotel hallway and bad coffee anymore? The next morning, I packed up my stuff with a strange mix of excitement and nerves. When I stepped out of my room, Eli was already waiting by the elevator, looking like he hadn't slept much either. Ready? He asked with that lopsided grin. I nodded, and we stepped into the elevator together, both of us knowing that whatever came next, this wasn't just some random hotel encounter. It was something that was meant to be found, however unexpected or messy it might turn out to be. The moment we stepped out of the elevator on the ground floor, the noise of the city hit me like a wave. Honking cars, people chatting, the distant rumble of construction. It was a sharp contrast to the calm bubble of the hotel, which suddenly felt like a whole different world. Eli glanced around, like sizing up the streets. There's a little coffee shop 2 blocks from here. Best espresso in the neighborhood. No overpriced tourist nonsense. I smiled, feeling a little thrill. Lead the way. As we walked, the city felt alive in a way I hadn't really noticed during my usual work trips. Like it was full of stories, not just buildings and noise. Eli matched my pace, and the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. So, do you live around here? I asked. Not too far, he said. I crash in a tiny studio on the west side. Not glamorous, but it's mine. Sounds cozy, he shrugged. It's home. You? I hesitated. I live across the river in a neighborhood that's not exactly buzzing with excitement. Mostly work, Netflix, and my cat, he laughed. Sounds like a solid life. It is, but sometimes I wonder if I'm missing out on something else, you know? More than just routines and deadlines. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. Yeah, I get that. I guess that's why I like this hotel so much, because it's a little crossroads for people who don't quite fit in anywhere else. Like us. The way he said us caught me off guard. I felt my chest tighten again. We reached the coffee shop, a tiny place with wooden tables and a chalkboard menu. The smell of fresh beans filled the air. Eli ordered 2 espressos, and we found a corner seat by the window. For a while, we just drank coffee and watched the street. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward. It felt like a pause, a breath between 2 chapters. Finally, Eli leaned in a bit. "So what brought you here for work?" I told him about the project I was managing, some tech conference that had me running around like a headless chicken. He listened intently, nodding, asking questions that showed he actually cared. When he talked about his job, he didn't just mention the concierge duties. He told me about the people he met, the stories he overheard, the little ways he tried to make the hotel feel like a second home for guests who were far from theirs. "That's kind of beautiful, in a way," I said quietly. He smiled, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, maybe longing, maybe hope. After the coffee, we wandered the neighborhood like we had all the time in the world. We stopped at a record store where he picked out a vinyl for me, a compilation of old soul songs. "Thought you might like a soundtrack for your routines," he said. I felt my throat tighten again. "Thanks, Eli." He shrugged off the weight of the moment with a joke. "Don't get too sentimental on me just yet." As the afternoon slipped into evening, we found ourselves sitting on a bench in a small park. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The city's noise faded into the background, replaced by the rustling of leaves and distant laughter. I looked over at him, his profile cut against the glowing sky, and realized how easy it felt to be around him. Like I could be myself without all the usual walls. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I asked hesitantly. He turned to me, eyes searching. "I do. Every day. What scares you?" "Not knowing if this, whatever this is, has a chance. Or if it's just a moment, like the rest of the hotel guests who come and go." I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. Moments can turn into something more, if we want them to. He smiled softly, and for the first time since I met him, I felt like maybe I wasn't just passing through a strange hotel or a strange city. Maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, as we walked back to the hotel, the streetlights casting long shadows, Eli stopped and pulled me into a quiet alley. The city felt miles away in that moment, just the 2 of us, close enough to hear each other's breath. "I don't want this to end," he said, voice low. "Me neither," I admitted. And then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't perfect or cinematic, but it was real, tentative and messy, and full of everything we hadn't said out loud. When we pulled apart, Eli grinned. "So, what now?" I shrugged, heart pounding. "Now? We see where this goes." That night, we said goodbye with a promise to keep in touch. As I left the hotel the next morning, the record tucked under my arm, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe it was the city, maybe it was the coffee, but mostly it was him, the concierge who kept showing up on my floor and somehow showed up in my life too. And honestly, I can't wait to find out what happens next. When I got home, the first thing I did was unpack the record Eli gave me. The cover was a little worn around the edges, but that just made it feel more real, like it had a story before it landed in my hands. I set the needle down on the vinyl, and the warm crackle of the music filled my apartment. It was the perfect soundtrack for the quiet evening that followed. Honestly, after the trip, I wasn't sure what to expect. We'd promised to keep in touch, but I didn't know if that was just polite words people say when something feels good but might not last. The truth is, I wasn't exactly a pro at this connecting with someone thing, especially with someone like Eli, who had managed to sneak into my thoughts in a way no one else had in a long time. The next day, I messaged him. Simple stuff. Thanked him again for the record, asked how his day was going. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a quick reply or two before the conversation fizzled out. But he replied almost immediately. Not just a hey, but a whole paragraph about how he'd been thinking about our walk, the park, the sunset. It was the kind of message that made me smile like an idiot in the middle of my cubicle, trying not to stare at my phone too much. We started texting every day after that. His messages were effortless, like he was sharing a little piece of his world, and I found myself opening up in ways I usually didn't. Work stress, dumb jokes, childhood stories. He took it all in, and somehow it felt like he really cared. A couple of days into this new rhythm, he sent me a photo of his apartment's tiny balcony, covered in plants and some string lights that looked like stars caught in a jar. "Welcome to my jungle," was the caption. I sent a picture back, my own tiny space cluttered with books and that same record spinning on the turntable. We joked about how different our lives were, but how somehow it didn't feel like a gap. It felt like a bridge. A week later, I booked a weekend back to the city. Partly for work, partly because I wasn't ready to let this go without seeing where it might lead. When I arrived, Eli was waiting at the hotel lobby, looking even better in person than I remembered. A little more relaxed, maybe because it wasn't just a quick encounter anymore. "Hey, stranger," he said, that crooked smile making my heart beat faster. "Hey yourself," I replied, feeling the familiar pull between us. That night, we went out to a small, tucked-away bar Eli knew. It was dimly lit, with soft music playing, and the kind of place that felt like it had been waiting for us to find it. We talked about everything and nothing, our hopes, our fears, the weirdness of life that somehow brought two people from different worlds together. At one point, Eli reached over and took my hand. The warmth of his touch sent a shock through me, a reminder that this wasn't just some fleeting thing. This was real. Later, when we walked back to his apartment under the glow of street lamps, the city quiet except for our footsteps, he stopped me with a serious look. "I want to be honest," he said. "This isn't always easy for me. I've had my share of bad experiences. But with you, it feels different." I squeezed his hand. "It does for me too." That night, lying side by side on his couch, the city lights filtering through the curtains, I realized I hadn't felt this alive in a long time. It wasn't just the novelty of meeting someone new. It was the way Eli made me feel seen, like I mattered. Over the next few months, we found a rhythm that worked. Weekends in the city, late-night calls when we were apart, little surprises that reminded us we were thinking about each other. There were challenges, distance, busy schedules, moments of doubt, but every time I looked at Eli, I knew it was worth it. One evening, as we sat on his balcony surrounded by plants and fairy lights, he turned to me with that same quiet intensity. "You changed something in me," he said. "Made me believe in us." I smiled, tracing patterns on his hand. "You did that for me, too. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all you need." Looking back, I never expected a hotel concierge to show up on my floor and end up changing my entire story. But that's the thing about life. It throws you surprises when you least expect them, and if you're lucky, they'll turn into something beautiful. We had settled into this strange but wonderful in-between, part-time romance, part-time something deeper. I was still juggling my work life back across the river, while Eli held down his post at the hotel, weaving stories for guests while secretly building one of his own with me. It wasn't perfect, but hell, it felt real. One night, I remember texting him after a long day buried under deadlines. I sent a half-joking message about how I needed an escape, a break from the grind that was slowly eating me alive. His reply came almost instantly. "I know a place. Wanna come?" It was vague, but knowing Eli, it was an invitation I couldn't ignore. So the next weekend, I found myself back in the city again, suitcase in hand and heart thrumming with anticipation. Eli met me outside the hotel, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. "Ready for the mystery tour?" he asked. I laughed. "As ready as I'll ever be." We hopped into a cab, but instead of heading downtown or anywhere touristy, Eli told the driver to take us to a part of the city I rarely visited, a neighborhood with a mix of old brick buildings, cozy cafes, and streets lined with trees. When we got out, Eli took my hand and led me down narrow sidewalks, past little shops and street art that felt like a secret language only locals understood. "Where are we going?" I asked as we walked. "It's a surprise," he said, the kind of smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. Eventually, we arrived at this tiny bookshop tucked between a bakery and a vinyl store. The sign above the door was faded, but inside, the place was a treasure trove of well-loved books and the smell of old paper. Eli's eyes lit up. "This is my favorite place in the city." We spent the next hour browsing shelves, pulling out random titles and reading snippets aloud. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't for a long time, the stress of work melting away under Eli's easy presence. He picked up a tattered copy of a poetry book and handed it to me. "You should have this." I looked at him, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Consider it a little piece of me to take with you." I took the book, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Later, as we stepped back onto the street, Eli pulled me close. "I want you to know something." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I'm serious about this. About us. I don't do casual. I don't do meaningless. If we're doing this, I want all of it." His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized in that moment how much I wanted the same thing, how much I was ready to let down the walls I'd been building around myself for years. "I want that too," I said quietly. "I'm tired of pretending that this is just a fling." He smiled, a little shy now, but fierce in his honesty. "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few weeks, things deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. We stopped hiding parts of ourselves and started sharing everything. The little quirks, the fears, the dreams we'd been too scared to voice before. One evening, after a late dinner at Eli's place, we found ourselves sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered records and empty wine glasses. The mood was light, but beneath it, I could feel the weight of something important. "I've been thinking," Eli began, tracing circles on the back of my hand. "Uh-oh," I teased. "Should I be worried?" He laughed, but his eyes were serious. "No, I want to know what you see in all this. The distance, the chaos, the mess." I looked at him, really looked. "I see someone who's real. Someone who makes this city feel less lonely. Someone who makes me want to try." His smile softened, and he leaned in, brushing his forehead against mine. "That means everything to me." In that moment, I realized how far we'd come, from two strangers crossing paths in a hotel hallway to something that felt like home. But life, as it tends to do, wasn't about to let things stay simple. A few days later, I got an unexpected call from my boss. The project I was supposed to be wrapping up was shifting, and they wanted me to relocate temporarily. 6 months, maybe longer. It wasn't just a quick trip or a few weekends away anymore. When I told Eli, I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes, the same worry I felt knotting my stomach. "We'll make it work," I said, more to convince myself than him. He nodded, but his voice was quieter than usual. "I know, we have to." That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything we'd built. The late-night texts, the weekend visits, the quiet moments that had become the best parts of my day. I didn't know how the next chapter would unfold. I didn't know if the distance would stretch too far, or if the time apart would fray the edges of what we had. But I did know one thing. Eli wasn't just a guy in a concierge uniform anymore. He was the reason I wanted to believe in something more, and I was willing to fight for it, even if it meant showing up on his floor again, months from now, hoping he'd still be there waiting. The day I packed my bags for the temporary move, there was this weird mix of excitement and dread tangled inside me. I kept thinking about Eli, the way he looked that night when I told him about the relocation, the quiet seriousness in his eyes that didn't quite match the words we said to each other. Before I left, we spent every spare moment together, trying to cram months of memories into a few short days. On my last evening in the city, Eli suggested we take one last walk through the neighborhood where we'd shared that surprise bookstore trip. The streets were quieter now, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and the occasional neon sign flickering to life. We walked hand in hand, the silence between us, comfortable but charged. At one point, Eli stopped outside a little cafe that was already closed for the night. He looked at me, a little nervous but determined. "I want you to have this," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his coat pocket. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and carefully unwrapped it back at his apartment. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind with thick pages and a worn cover. "Start writing," he said. "About everything, your days, your thoughts, us. I want to keep up with you, even if we're apart." I looked up, touched by the gesture. "I will, and I'll send you some too." He nodded, eyes lingering on mine. "Promise me something? Anything. Promise me you won't let the distance scare you. that you'll fight for this." I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing on me. "I promise." The next morning, as I dragged my suitcase through the airport, I kept replaying that promise in my head. It was scary, stepping into the unknown, but Eli's words felt like a lifeline. The first few weeks were rough. Time zones messed with our schedules, and the rushed video calls never quite matched the easy conversations we'd had in person. I missed the way he looked in the morning light, the way his laugh filled the room, the small rituals that made us twinsons. But through it all, we kept talking. Texts, calls, the journal entries Eli sent me in the mail, carefully written pages filled with his thoughts and sketches of the city from his balcony. It was like having a piece of him with me when everything else felt distant. One night, after a particularly grueling day, I opened the journal and found a note tucked inside. It was simple, a drawing of the two of us, with a little heart between our stick figure hands. Beneath it, in Eli's neat handwriting, counting the days. I smiled, feeling the ache of missing him, and the hope that this distance was just a chapter, not the whole story. Months passed, and then, finally, the call I'd been waiting for came. My project was wrapping up sooner than expected, and I had the green light to come back. When I told Eli, I could almost hear the relief in his voice. "I'll be waiting." I booked the flight immediately, my heart pounding with excitement and nerves. What if things had changed? What if the distance had broken something fragile between us? But as soon as I walked through the hotel doors, all those fears melted away. Eli was there, just like he'd promised, waiting in the lobby, wearing that same crooked smile that had first caught my attention months ago. We didn't rush into words. Instead, we just stood there for a moment, letting the silence say everything. Then he pulled me into a hug, warm and steady, like coming home. Over the next few days, we picked up where we left off, making plans and dreaming about what could be next. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. But it felt right. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, watching the city lights flicker below, Eli took my hand. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "maybe it's time I stopped waiting for people to come to me." I looked at him, heart skipping. "What do you mean?" He smiled, a little sheepishly. "What if I took a chance? What if I tried something new? Maybe even moved closer?" I blinked, surprise and hope swirling inside me. "Are you serious?" "More than anything," he said, squeezing my hand. In that moment, I realized how far we'd come, from random meetings in hotel hallways to real plans for a future that felt possible. I smiled back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer breeze. "Then let's figure it out, together." Because sometimes the most unexpected encounters, like a concierge who keeps showing up on your floor, turn into the stories you never knew you were waiting for. And this one? It felt like just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a blur of decisions and adjustments, but the one thing that never wavered was Eli's quiet determination. He didn't rush into moving closer, but he started looking, scouting neighborhoods, weighing options, talking through logistics like we were building something real, brick by brick. I watched him do it with that same steady focus he had when helping guests at the hotel or curating the perfect playlist for the lobby. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was just him showing up, day after day, committed to making this work. The day he told me he'd found an apartment not far from mine was one of those rare moments when everything felt perfectly aligned. We sat across from each other at a little cafe, halfway between our two places, sipping coffees that actually tasted good, and just smiled. "I'm nervous," Eli admitted, fiddling with his cup. I reached over, took his hand. "Me too. But it feels right." He looked up, eyes shining. "I want to wake up next to you, not just on weekends." "That sounds pretty great," I said. That night, after he'd agreed to start the move, we took a slow walk through the city streets, the kind of walk where you don't really need words because everything's already said in the space between you. As we paused on a quiet bridge, looking out over the river reflecting the glow of streetlights, I realized how much had changed since that first night in the hotel hallway. The nervous smiles, the stolen moments, the late night talks, the distance, and how those pieces had woven us into something stronger than I'd thought possible. I never expected any of this. A concierge showing up on my floor and changing my life. Eli grinned. "Sometimes, life surprises you." I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart next to mine. "Here's to surprises," I said. He squeezed my hand, and in that simple moment, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. No grand declarations, no sweeping gestures, just two people choosing each other every day in the quiet, ordinary ways that make a love story real. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.